right, everybody, welcome back. So last time we wrapped up a bit of a conversation about orthogonal matrices. We talked about Lie groups very briefly to say that these particular orthogonal matrices matrices are particularly nice from both a topological and an algebraic standpoint, so much so that there's an entire field of math dedicated to their study. And it actually revolves around symmetries. It's used in physics all the time. But I digress. I started last video saying that there was this way for us to use QR factorizations to solve linear systems, but we never actually did an example, so I'm going to do an example in this video. But there's one thing I would like to say about the QR factorization before we do that example, and it's that the Gram-Schmidt algorithm, if we have a linearly independent set of vectors, v1 through vn, then there is only one way for this algorithm to proceed. Right? There's one orthogonal set that shows up at the end, and well, there's one little bit here that talks about the uniqueness of this algorithm, or the uniqueness of the QR factorization that comes out at the end of the Gram-Schmidt algorithm. What we didn't discuss was what happens if your matrix has linearly dependent columns, and that could wind up giving you negative values on the diagonal of the R matrix, right? So that would be a strange instance of linear dependence, right? Or it would be, let's see, yeah, it would be a weird instance of linear dependence that shows up here. But almost never in practice do we actually use Gram-Schmidt on any other kind of set apart from a linearly independent collection of vectors. So I will state this more for posterity than for anything, that this theorem is telling us that once you have computed a QR factorization for a given matrix, then you have the QR factorization for that matrix, right? And the way that you can tell it's unique is if the entries of R on the diagonal are positive, right? So it would stand out to me that might be the case where your R entries or the diagonal R entries might dip to the negative side, but the theorem actually says that we're dealing with non-singular matrices. So that means that the columns already are they're already linearly independent. So in this case, I think what you should take away from this theorem is that, well, just about any matrix that you want to deal with has a QR factorization, and that QR factorization is unique, right? If you do wind up with multiple QR factorizations, then you're dealing with a particularly ugly system, and you might want to think about changing your approach to solving whatever problem you're working on. So for right now, take this to the bank. Your QR factorization, when it exists, is unique, right? And now we're going to use that QR factorization. Right? We're going to do a specific example here. And just for the sake of an example, I'm going to say that we're dealing with this linear system, AX equals B. And we can solve this guy via a QR factorization decomposition. Or that's a bit redundant, isn't it? Through a QR factorization. Okay. So what we're going to do is we are going to break up A into its QR factorization, right? All of these entries on the diagonal are positive, therefore this is a unique decomposition, a unique QR decomposition. And we're going to break this up into solving a QY equals B first, and then following it up with an upper triangular RX equals Y system. And that will get us to the solution that we're looking for. But remember, in general, this QY equals B system, this is dense in general, right? All throughout here, there's not a single zero entry. So this is, in general, going to be a very dense computation for us to have to undertake. But we already know what the inverse of this matrix is because the matrix is orthogonal, right? So orthogonal matrices tell us exactly what their inverses are without us having to do any computation, right? The transpose already has the entries of Q in it. They're just in different places. Right? They're flipped across the diagonal. So we really, in order to solve this system, Qy equals B, all we have to do is multiply B by Q transpose, and we're done. Okay, so that gives us the y vector. And this y vector goes straight into the next step where we're going to follow up with a back substitution in the upper triangular system Rx equals y. In Rx equals y, you can go ahead and match up coefficients down here. It's the same coefficient, therefore z has to be 1. Right, so we take 1 and throw it into the next row, so this times 1 has to equal, oh boy, so that means that y has to be 0 on this row, since I get the same coefficient here and here. Cool, so we've already gotten 2/3 of this vector. Come on, one more. So I pop in y and z into the first row, and it looks like I'm adding a 1 over root 3. Yeah, I'm just adding a 3, root 3 here. So this is a -2 root 3 on the right, divide by a root 3 from the left, and I pick up the -2 in that row as per usual. All right, so that means I can go ahead and solve these systems now via a QR factorization. Now, that means that our solution is this vector down here, and you can verify it, right? You can multiply A into this vector, and you'll pick up the B vector, no problem. And the last thing I will say before we close out this section, this will be 4.3 in the textbook, there is an issue of numerical stability of the Gram-Schmidt algorithm, right? I have an extra credit problem in the problem set on the class webpage for you to test this out, right? Our methods are a little bit incomplete from a numerical standpoint. And what we would like to do here, like the key reason why these guys are particularly nasty has to do with how certain vectors are very, very close to being parallel to one another. Right? So these guys, I would have to be looking for a very, very small vector in order to complete the Gram-Schmidt projection, or to complete an orthogonal projection onto these vectors. So the problem is that the numbers can get either very, very small or very, very large, depending on what you're multiplying by or dividing by. And the problem with this is that you want to avoid that if at all possible. You would like to reflect this guy through another plane so that it makes this projection a little cleaner, right? So you're taking this vector and reflecting him over to another guy so that you're still in the same span as before, but you're using a better vector, a better basis vector, as opposed to the ones that were given to you in the original matrix. And this is the idea behind householder reflection. This is something that you should consider if you're going into a discipline with scientific computing as a major component. And I would highly recommend taking a look through the textbook to see why we look at householder reflection and and how we might implement it so we get a more stable, numerically stable algorithm than what the plain old Gram-Schmidt process will give us. But for right now, this is going to take us a little bit too far abroad, and I would like to skip it for the moment. If we really need to talk about it, we will. But I would like to leave this to you and your specific disciplines, because some of you may need it and some of you just flat out will never see it. So perfectly fine to leave it for right now, and I think this is going to end section 4.3. So in the next video, we're going to look into something that we don't usually see at this level, but I think it's well worth the detour, and it's a very short detour. We're going to talk about orthogonal complements. We're going to talk about how vector spaces can be broken up or decomposed into smaller subspaces based on the inner product. And this is the idea of the orthogonal complement, and it plays a major role in what's called the Fredholm alternative. And this is telling you when your system has solutions in the first place. It's a good way to check that you have a solution before you go